House out. Letting cues 1 through 10. Sound cues 1
All right, cut to edge of stage. Great. All right, color frost.
Check. 1, 2, 3. Check.
Stand by, please. Cuts to half. House out. Letting cues 1 through 10. Sound cues 1 through 10.
Hello, and welcome to the title block. Can you even see me? Let me just get Zoom all sorted out here. All right, welcome back to the title block. I'm your host, of course, Michael Cruz, and this week we'll be taking your questions on set design. Thanks a bunch for finding us this week on the YouTube channel. Last week, I know it was a bit exciting, but to make sure you don't miss out next time, make sure that you click subscribe on the title block page there on the YouTube page for title block. Joining me this week, a fantastic panel, which you can see before you. This person is a former president of the ADC, although she continues to design for theater from time to time. She has spent many years working as a set designer and art director for film and television in Toronto, and has just retired from teaching theater at the University of Guelph. She recently published a book on the design work of Susan Benson and was the co-creator of a touring exhibition and catalog of the work of Cameron Porteous. From episode 31 of the title block, please welcome Pat Flood.
Hello.
This person is a Toronto-based set and costume designer who has worked across Canada, as well as in the United States and England. She also teaches in the Department of Theatre at York University. From episode number 5 and 6 of the title block, please welcome Shawn Kerwin.
Hi.
She is a set and costume designer for theater, opera, dance, and site-specific installations. She also loves being part of the process of working on new work. From a future episode of the title block, please welcome Camellia Koo.
Yeah.
This person's been designing sets and costumes for theater and some opera and dance for more than 40 years. Her work has always ranged from major festivals to small independent companies, with lots of new work in the mix. From episode number 18 of the title block, please welcome Sue LePage. And this person has been designing since 1977 when he quit as a high school art teacher. He has no training and has faked his way through it ever since. From episode 44 of the title block, please welcome Ken MacDonald. That is an awesome bio, by the way, Ken. Thank you so much. And he is a scenic lighting and costume designer based in Toronto. He's been a resident artist at Soul Pepper Theatre Company and is the current president of the board of directors of the Associated Designers of Canada. From a future episode of the title block, please welcome Ken Mackenzie.
Hi, gang.
He is an award-winning set, costume, lighting, and projection designer. He's been designing for 20 years, most notably with Soul Pepper Theatre, the Stratford Festival, the Grand Ballet Canadien, Joffrey Ballet, and most regional theaters from coast to coast. From episode 39 of the title block, please welcome Lorenzo Savoini. Awesome. And my co-host on the title block live is a lighting, set, and projection designer from Vancouver. It is Mr. Conor Moore. Conor, hello.
Hello, how's it going?
Whew, better. Here we are. Let me just double check to make sure the stream is working.
Yeah, I don't mean to be that guy, but I just went to the YouTube page and it seemed to say it was still waiting and that we weren't actually live.
That's very odd. I went through all of that. Let's find out. I think that we are. Let me double check. Oh, that seems very strange.
I think we're live now. I just went over to YouTube and saw it.
I think there's a delay. I think that's what that is. Let me just double check.
They're censoring out all our swear words. So just like
yeah, probably. There is no delay, so you can go ahead and swear all you want. and then we'll find out. Yeah, let me just go to.
I think we're good. I just saw someone in the YouTube chat say you are live.
Oh, fantastic!
good.
I'm just on the
So they've
wrong
also
page.
seen this conversation about whether or not we're live.
Oh, thank God! Oh, it's live now. It says live now. That's fantastic. Okay, good. I have to figure that'll be what I figure out next week is how to figure out how I'm actually live. All right. Well, take it away, Connor. Go ahead and start the interrogation. Who's going to answer some questions for us about set design?
Awesome. Well, thank you very much to all the panelists who have joined us tonight. And thank you to everyone watching on YouTube. And if you have any questions at any point, post them in the YouTube chat and Michael will send them over to us. So I wanted to start with a broad question, which is, what made each of you decide to pursue set design?
Well, I'll start just to start the conversation.
Because you're a man.
I was convinced to do it. I was actually I have an undergraduate degree in performance, and I took a lot of design electives. And the head of design at Concordia University, she basically made me her project. She decided she would turn me into a designer. And I think what really sealed the deal for me is that after I graduated and was still occasionally auditioning for things, I was asked to audition for a character in a coma. And I didn't get the part. And so I think I decided I don't need to be an actor. It's just not a thing I'm all that interested in. So I focused on design at that point, and then it just kind of picked up. And that's basically how it started.
I started. Oh, go, Pat. Go.
I did performance at university too, and left thinking I needed more training if I was going to do that. But I loved it all. I loved everything that I did and liked to do things with my hands. So once I got busy and working backstage, then that it was just a natural sort of a progression. And I had, as you said, Ken, some electives and that sort of thing. So I had some tools. And then I worked backstage as an assistant and designing my own little things for 10 years. And I loved all of that. I didn't feel that I was waiting in the wings at all. I really enjoyed it. I remember going up one of the first years, the first year I was there at Stratford, just sort of working in the loading dock, going up to John Ferguson and going, how long will it take me to be a designer like you? And 5 years or 10 years? And he said to me, I'm not that old. That was it. So yes, just felt at home, and the progress was natural.
I was teaching high school, teaching art, grade 11 and 12, drawing and painting. And my friend Sheila McCarthy was going out with Don Shipley, and he was going to be doing a show. He was taking over the Belfry Theater. And she said, well, my friend Ken can draw. And I went, well, okay. So he said, do you want to design a set for me? I said, well, I've never done that, but I'll try. And it was putting on the Ritz. And so I simply drew a drawing of what I thought the final set might look like, not in any scale or anything, just like a drawing. And somebody built it. And then after that, he said, would you like to be my resident designer? And I said, okay. So I quit teaching high school. And that's why I said I'm the one who faked it through. And then I taught myself how to do blueprints at the time, and just sort of cried my way through learning that. And I've never been very good at drafting. Thank you, Ken Mackenzie and Lorenzo Savoini and other people who assisted me. And so I just fell into it because all my friends were in theater, and I sang and danced in shows, but I was terrible. So it was much better to be on this side.
I was working in Toronto when I was in high school at Factory Theatre designing, well, I wouldn't say designing, putting costumes on actors, and working at Toronto Free Theatre, doing the same thing with tiny budgets and small resources. And Eric Steiner, the director, who I was a very good friend with, said I needed to get some training. And I kind of ran off. No, I didn't run off to England. I went to England. I'd been planning to go to England a lot, but I finally went with Factory Theatre when Ken Gass took a bunch of Canadian plays over, some of which I had done the costumes for. And I was 20 years old, I guess. And I happened to go with Doug Robinson, who'd been the set designer, to see a school he was interested in looking at, which was the Sadler's Wells design course. And I walked in the door, and the minute I walked in the door and met Percy Harris, who was one of the Motley designers, I thought, I have to be here. And I ended up getting accepted there, and the year was being a set and doing set and costume design. They didn't really separate out those two disciplines at all. So I started designing sets because I was put in that world.
I knew I wanted to be a set designer or costume designer, both in high school, but I didn't really know what that meant in high school or how sometimes unglamorous it actually is. I wanted to be an architect. I wanted to be a children's story writer, illustrator. I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to be all these things. And then I sort of was assisting with, because I was always doing the art classes. They asked us to help paint the scenery and, be backstage. I never wanted to perform. And then I discovered that I could be all those things, not an expert at any of them, but I got to be a bit of everything. And it was sort of the perfect thing where I could, do all of those things. So, and then the rest is history. So
similar for me was in high school, wanting to be an architect, I think. And then there was a career day, and an architect came and spoke, and he was so boring. So boring. And I thought, oh my God, I can't do that. And I think he did like bathrooms, like he focused on certain like it was so disappointing. I wanted to meet Frank Gehry and I didn't. So anyway, but like I think most, went to University of Guelph, like went through performance, but went to the University of Guelph, which is I thought a great program because you bid into a bit of everything. And it wasn't until sort of end of the first year, after doing some performing and some intro to tech and being on crews, that I saw one of the professors work, Alan Watts, who did something really, I just never seen something symbolic or metaphorical three-dimensionally on stage before, and it was really exciting and sort of made me curious, which then led to taking courses and diving into the other side of things.
Pat, do you want to weigh in on this?
Okay, I was also a failed actor. But I remember when I was in high school, some touring company came and they set their setup on stage, and I got to go and help out. I don't know what I was doing, but I remember going up on the stage and just being amazed at this world that was all fake, but looked so real, that was on this stage and in this space. And I thought, I want to do that. I just want to make worlds that other people can get into.
Amazing. So moving on to a question about process. When designing, do you have a specific work process?
Deny.
I think it's different. It's different for every show, and it's different with every director and or team of collaborators, I find. So depending on who I'm working with, I say it's a director I've worked with a lot. I know that process, and we have a shorthand because we've done a few shows together. Whereas working with a new director, you have to feel that out, and it has to work. There's no choice. It has to be a good relationship, no matter what, in order for the show to happen. So you just find your way, and even with the same director that I've worked with many times, each show is so different. The space is so different. The budgets are so different. So I try not to lock myself into like a hard process or a hard methodology, because it's all about being adaptable and being open enough to new ideas and just fluid enough to you know, to I don't know, I can't speak anymore, but just to find the best solution as opposed to sort of going, this is how I work, which is not going to get you very far, very fast at all. So that's what I find.
No, I think that's one of the reasons why we do what we do is we want to be chameleons, whether we are or not. The feeling that each new project with a director can take you to a new place, and you don't know when you start with them whether you're going to be the lead or they're going to be the lead. I remember making a great piece with the idea of working with Robin Phillips when I was quite young, and it was absolutely terrifying. But I just went, what's to lose? Like, if he wants to lead all of this, I'm just going to grow with it, and I'm going to learn to see how he sees. And then if it builds up, if I get a little pent up energy in terms of this is not me, well, then get away from that, and there it all is. It's you know when you want the bit in your teeth because you've got a response to a script or a project that you're the one that's out there. So I'd be so bored if it was just if it was me, if I wasn't a perpetual student. So
Yeah.
I'd say that. Well, I'd just say that it to expand on the question. I would say it's changed over the years. I think that when I first started, or I should say that building confidence in how you, through what door you go to sort of explore a play and what it is you're pulled to and interested in, you do eventually develop a sense of aesthetic and a sense of yourself and a confidence and an interest of what pulls you in, and then a desire to want to have a voice and to be able to participate in the collaboration fully. And I think that when I started, you know, it was you just wanted to not get fired and get away with it. And I think we all, you know, on some level, you still start and you think, oh my God, I've never done this before. In a way, I feel trying to find the in. How am I going to what diving board and through what door? But I think to support what everyone's saying, I agree that collaboration really is the opportunity to jump off into somewhere you've not been, or to explore a play in a way that you're not used to, which can help you grow and work in new ways.
That's interesting. I think I'd be interested to know, because a lot of us work in in little bubbles, and each team sort of finds a way of working with each other that is unique to the project and circumstance. Was there anything that any of you found, especially early in your career, where you've been doing one thing one way, and it never seemed strange until you kind of sort of went to you went to a festival, or you started talking to other designers, and they didn't work that way at all? Was there anything you found out that that you were a bit surprised at by the way someone else worked, and then you would maybe adapted that to your own process, or rejected it, or changed your mind?
I know when I started working doing costumes, I did everything myself, and as I got a bit more experience, I found watching people who knew how to delegate to get other people to do things, that was such a strange, exotic, challenging concept. And so I think that there was a real period of transition when I realized I had to learn how to, if I was ever going to do anything, I had to be able to expand beyond being the person who did everything themselves. And so learning the skills of how to get someone else to see inside your brain and communicate properly, that was a huge shift for me. and I have really clear memories of how hard it was to make that transition. But it was from watching, watching that there were other designers and that they did things differently, that I realized I had to figure out how to do it.
I remember the very first show I ever did was at Manitoba Theatre Center Warehouse with a director named Michael Mawson. And I had no idea what he was talking about. I honestly thought if we both said red, it would be a different red. I was lost and so discouraged in that first show. It was crazy that I thought, wow, there's so many different ways that people think and approach things. And what's, I guess, been wonderful for me, possibly because I've been very interested in the process of designing, and I've, taught a fair bit, like at Concordia at the University of Guelph, and done a lot of sort of designer panels, is I just love the different ways that people work. I remember, Cami, one thing that you and Ida Holmes were talking about, I remember talking about like listing words. You just did a whole list of words at one point. And I thought, I've never thought of that. Like, I've never thought of that particular approach. And it's been so wonderful to see students and other designers who, like I know most of you guys in this panel, and you've all been really good about sharing how you work. And it's great. There's so many different approaches, and yet it's so exciting because of that.
Yeah, I find seeing other designers' process and their work like endlessly fascinating, because I think there's something really interesting about just seeing a slightly different approach. It used to be when I started that I would zero in on a particular idea really quickly, and I think one of the things that I've learned is how to be continue to be open to a multiplicity or a critical mass of ideas, so that by the time I'm having meetings with the director or a few meetings in, we still have that critical mass of ideas, and we haven't winnowed away the things that we consider extra, or that I might think are extra ideas or are no longer useful. And in fact, most of the time they turn out to continue to be useful later on into the process. So it's that was a real learning point for me, like just the multiplicity of ideas as being really, really useful.
I think I find that, oh, sorry, go Sue.
No, I was just going to say, I don't think there's really in my world a whole lot of rejecting. There's things that are wrong for this time and this combination, but I find early ideas go underground and still in form. That there's a kind of river that constitutes your own initial experience of it all, that stays, and it often comes back when you're back in the theater. You go, okay, everything's shifting again, and then you've got that kind of underground source. But that doesn't mean you haven't really changed territory and covered a lot of ground. So yeah, I think continuing to shift is good. Ken, don't let me stop.
I think I find that I have found out that I really need to come with something for the first or second meeting with the director, that I can't expect that they are also, they're thinking design-wise at all. And if I don't come with something, some folded paper, some little sketches, just some ideas that we can bounce off of, it's not much point in having a very first meeting, like where we just sort of, like I know I've done a number of shows at Arena Stage in Washington recently, and they'll have what's called the design meeting. They'll fly me down just to have a talk. But I always come down basically with a little model, and a lot of ideas. And it often ends up being that with things that like Molly Smith, for example, has added to it. But I find that I think as a designer, you should be coming with something and then let it bounce off, because it's starting from nothing with both of you is really kind of impossible. Even if the idea that you bring is terrible and you all decide, well, that's awful. But I think that you should come with something. I think it's your responsibility as a designer.
Although, and I totally agree, there are some directors of very high caliber that I've come to learn that if there's something I'm excited about, I may not necessarily want to thrust it upon them boldly the first meeting, because just out of spite, they'll say no and move on to something that we could develop together. And so it really is. Sometimes you do. I agree. Sometimes you've got these ideas and you're just really, this is it. This is so good. And it's trying to realize that it really is like I've got to figure out how to let them into that, because I can imagine if it's the other way around and they come and say, listen, I found this thing that I want it to be exactly like this.
Yeah.
It's like disarming, and you're trying to find the language and the collaboration and the nature of it. Where that is, when you have a long-term relationship with somebody, with a director, of course, there's a shorthand.
Yeah.
And that's a lot easier to manage. But it's that weird balance of wanting to come as informed and ready, and with the ability to have something to get the collaboration going at the same time, trying to find a balance between making everyone feel as though this is being birthed together.
No, I agree. Yeah.
I love turning up with a big bag full of ideas that I don't necessarily bring out. I feel like I may come to any meeting with a lot of thought, but I don't necessarily put it forward unless it seems to be appropriate to the conversation that I'm having with whoever I'm collaborating with. And because it's so important to hear them and see what bubbles out. And so I've often gone to meetings with things that have never come out of the bag, and I've been quite fine with that. Because I feel secure that I've got things in the bag, and I feel that if they don't need to come out, then that's because I've learned something new to take away.
So much depends on the temperament of the director that way. If they've been busy on another project, they may say, help, show me everything you've got. I know I'm behind, you can kickstart me into this, it's great. Or they may go, I'm just not ready. If I listen too much and we get into this too much now, I'm giving it away before I know what I myself feel about it. And that I would come with things and keep them hidden away, or an empty pad of paper that I was ready to draw on. Drawing the director out, to me, is the first meeting.
For me too. I may have some ideas that I won't necessarily show unless I see that the conversation is going there anyways, and I'm like, well, here's an idea. But for me, my favorite, exactly. My favorite part of working with the director, and my favorite shows have been on shows where I and the director are learning the show at the same time, as opposed to them coming, going, this is what I want, this is what I know, and this is it, and I'm trying to catch up. And I've also worked on shows where I'm ahead of the director because they're on other shows, and I'm trying to like pull teeth to get them to agree or even say if they like something. So for me, my favorite shows are the ones where we are both learning the show at the same time. We are jamming ideas together. So I may bring a mass of books. I may have my hidden sketches. That's my actually favorite part of that process, is learning a show before even talking about ideas. The ideas will come, but even just actually making sure we both understand the show the same way.
And figuring out how to dance together. I feel it's like having a dance partner where you're doing that kind of waltzing dancing, and you have to not step on each other's toes, and you have to find the rhythm, the combined rhythm that you're going to have to move through things. And I think it's one of the things I like most about the work, is that relationship when it's really good. It's so wonderful.
The next question I have is sort of semi-related, but I think it's territory that's worth exploring further. So the question is, what advice do you have towards battling artistic block? And also, how do you keep your designs unique from one another?
I don't know if they are unique from one another. I think there are certain things that you start to recognize that you like. They may manifest themselves totally differently in every project. but I know for me, I've come to realize that there are certain kinds of flavors that I like, even though every recipe may turn out differently. And in terms of when you get stuck, I really believe that often when I get stuck, I have to go back to the script. I have to trust that if I go back to the script, there's going to be an answer there. And the other thing is that I have to be willing to throw things out. And that sometimes I have to just put something in a model box, like literally a loaf of bread, like something, so that you have something. I did that once with John Jarvis. Something that you can push back against, and you have to not be afraid for it to be as outrageous and ridiculous as possible. Like you have to not worry about whether it's right. You have to put something in, and then sometimes you just have to walk away from it all.
I think you want to. I assume that I'm going to have some bad ideas, and I'm just going to work through all those. I'm going to do things myself and reject them and reject them and reject them. And by doing that, I'm going to figure out what I'm actually interested in. And it's like research, where I think you've got to do a certain amount, I think, in order to let it go, in order to toss it out and not worry about it. You've got to then do it and be done with it. When it's not serving you, you're free to toss it. So I expect to go through the woods.
Yeah, I think sometimes those bad ideas are actually just gold. I love sharing those bad ideas with directors. And having that kind of relationship where you can say, look, here are the 5 really terrible ideas that I had that maybe you can make some sense of, but I'm going to throw them out and see whether or not it does anything for you. And often it does. Often there's something in there that they connect with. But that can be a great way to help unblock a moment, or unblock a little, if you're struggling with figuring out how to stage a particular thing. I think coming up with all of the bad ideas, they shouldn't be censored necessarily.
Yeah, we're also not, we work a lot on our own, but it's not in total isolation, although now it is. But I've no problem if I'm stuck on something, calling up the director and go, hey, I can't quite work this through. Let's talk it through. That's, and that's the relationship you should be having with your director, because you are a team. And so yeah, showing bad ideas, showing the good ideas, something will come out and they'll respond to something. And I think that just not being afraid to make mistakes.
Don't self-censor. Yeah.
Oh no, go ahead, Pat. You were trying to say something.
I was just going to say, don't self-censor. It's what everyone's saying. You think, oh, that's a dumb idea, I won't tell anybody. But as Ken says, it's often the perfect thing, that sort of goes, oh, and not being afraid to throw it all out. Done so much work. And it's like, I can't let this go now, can I? But sometimes you just have to trash it.
Yeah. I think that's actually one of the most wonderful feelings, because you've allowed yourself to just let it go, and it's not weighing you down anymore, and you're not trying to force it to be the right answer when it's not.
Yep.
Michael, was there something you wanted to add?
I was just going to say, what about, there are some designers who are real kind of, I don't know, they have a particular style and you hire them for that show because you want that particular style. And I don't know if that is something I could say about anybody here. I'm sure everyone has their own style. I just haven't seen everything you've done, so I have no idea.
I think there are perceptions of different styles. People think people have certain styles, but you don't necessarily, you get locked into certain perceptions of what you do, which is.
And I think there are perceptions and sometimes realities, not necessarily about a style, but about your work process and your habits. And how you do your work. I think that may be the thing that, we all, no matter how much our outcomes might be totally different, we all have certain temperaments, and we all have certain kinds of energy. And I think those become the things that are recognizable for better or for worse.
Context
Excellent.
makes such a difference. Like it's the thing is, it's like deciding what to wear to a party. You know, if it's upscale, dress down. If it's downscale, dress up. Context makes a big difference. It's I don't carry around my own aesthetic, although I'm sure there are limits and self-editing and all kinds of things. But I think it's often the situation and the theater space and everything else. You go, okay, fresh here, fresh now, fresh for this script. What's that? And I think in a little poor space, you want to blow something out, and you don't want to seem overdressed to the party in other places. You know, so there's a whole culture of the project that also comes to bear on an aesthetic, which is interesting. I mean, sometimes there is an aesthetic to a place and a writer and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But what constitutes again something that feels new or that feels like it's in motion, it'll be different in different contexts.
I think if anybody ever said to me that they were bringing me onto a project because of a certain aesthetic I brought to my work, that would make me really self-conscious, and I would suddenly feel like I don't know what that means. I'm not exactly sure what you're looking for, and I would really need them to articulate that to me, because honestly, like my own sense of my aesthetic is maybe not as defined as other people's sense of my own aesthetic.
It's interesting. I just finished doing a production of Mary Poppins not too long ago, and when I was hired at the Grand, the director said, "Now I know this is going to seem crazy to you, but would you be interested in doing Mary Poppins?" And I just didn't understand why. I was curious, you know. I had to, you know, of course, yeah, I'm really interested. And I think that there's perceptions of a body of work. You can't help it. If you've got a website, you've got a portfolio, they see there is an aesthetic there, you know, that you might feel you can't. I try not to be self-conscious of it, but I think that others are sometimes saying, you know, I really want to know what you're going to do to Mary Poppins because of the aesthetic you have. And you know, that does make me nervous too, because I'm not overly conscious. I mean, broad strokes wise, you could, you know, I could understand. There's certain, you know, for probably everybody in this group, I'm aware of your work over the years, that I think that on some level, you know, I could probably sort of see a show and go, I can get it within 5 designers. But it's not something I'm self-conscious, or try not to be self-conscious about.
Have you ever found yourself in a rut? You're working a lot. You've got 5 shows all due within the same time period, and you're trying to not have any crosstalk. But you find now you've used the same couch in 2 of the 3 productions, and you're like, the couch fits, but maybe it doesn't. Like, how do you find your way out of that, if it's ever happened?
I think I sort of find myself when I make a model, I always make it. I make a little white model box, and I put a little gooseneck lamp over to one side, and I start folding white paper and twisting it around pencils and tearing organic shapes. And I've done about probably 5 shows in the last 3 or 4 years that are twisted white paper shows that have ended up being, you know. And I just got onto this thing that I went, oh, you know what? I'm just sort of there. I'm sorry. It's just a period of white twisted paper, and I like that. And you know, I won't force it onto like Mary Poppins, let's say. But I kind of feel like I do understand what Lorenzo was saying, that like, you know, when someone says, "Oh, Lorenzo, you might not be interested in Mary Poppins," because I think, you know, I see Lorenzo stuff and it's often very avant-garde and very modern, very cool. And you think, well, Mary Poppins, you know. But that's kind of fun to design that sort of show. It's like a real challenge for people like us who tend to do maybe more weird stuff. And I work with my partner Morris a lot. We've done 100 shows together. So I have this weird shorthand that I work with other directors, but not a huge amount of other directors. So it is weird. I do present stuff more than I think maybe other people do with discussions, because I know that I'm expected to come up with certain things. But I do think that we all, I mean, I look at all of you and I go, oh, I kind of, you know, I like friends, so I can say, I can probably guess whose that was. And I like that, because I'm jealous of every painter in the world who has a style. And I'm drawing every day now in this horrible isolation. I'm drawing every day. I've never drawn so much in my life. And I'm really loving it. I have a schedule. Morris and I have set a schedule for every day. And it literally is very like 10 o'clock, we do this. From 12 o'clock to 1, we exercise. From 1 to 2, we eat. From 2 to 4:30, we draw. He writes. From 5. And I sit down every day for 2.5 to 3 hours now and draw, and I look forward to it. And I think this is an amazing thing that's happened out of this, is that I've rediscovered my sense of drawing, and I'm rediscovering my style. And I'm beginning to go, oh, this is how I draw, because I can draw in so many different, well, I drew Ken in the ADC meeting when he was on. So yeah. So I think it's interesting. And do you get into a rut? Yeah, but I think you get into a style. You get into a thing. Well, I like, maybe you just like primary colors, but now you like every set black and white with a spot of red, or you like all white sets. You like whatever. I think we just go through phases, and I think that's okay. And I love seeing the other designers.
I agree.
Go through those phases.
I remember being aware of it and feeling strangely guilty of wanting to use the same material again, and realizing, a scenic painter said to me, "Oh no, you're going through your phase. You're going through
blue
your
period."
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's like, and it was a time I didn't want anything painted. I wanted the material to be inherently the thing, and not to faux anything. And so, I was putting this painter out of work, but they were really, really collaborative and really great about how it doesn't really, there's that, and then there's theatricalizing that, which means actually, there's something, but it's not. So anyway, I agree, Ken. It is, I think it's inescapable. I think it exists. With lighting designers as well, we are drawn, we develop over the years a sense of what we are excited about, we think is interesting, and we're exploring it, whether we're conscious or not.
But your style is not the goal. Your style
No, for
is
sure.
the style is not what you're trying to get to. The style is coming along for the ride.
Yeah.
And it's the stuff that's coming along is the stuff that served you, or that you still haven't solved in the same way, or that you have more road to chase it. So all these things are coming along with you, your style. They're not an end point in any way. And if something drops off because it doesn't relate to this project, or you've done it enough, or the end point wasn't what you thought it was, then you've just simply let it go, and there's something else in its place. So I can tell sometimes that there's been things that have niggled at me, and they recur in certain kinds of shows. Like when you're trying to do a landscape, but you're trying to do it almost abstractly. How do you figure out distance? How do you play with scale? All those things. And how minimal can you get so that the audience is providing it all? And I've done that a million times, and I don't know if people even know that I have, but I've been working at that forever just to see what happens down a similar road. So it's not a worry having a style, or I don't think it should be.
It's a good point. I mean, we don't, I guess we're all in our own heads. We think, oh, this looks the same as the last show, but the audience at Canadian Stage didn't go to the grand show that I just did, and they may not ever meet. So you can try and go down these different roads and figure out what works and what doesn't, and what you find pleasing, and maybe you've finally succeeded at doing the thing. I know I pursued for many shows trying to find out to have a shadowless light that was also contained on stage and didn't spill everywhere. And it took like 3 or 4 or 5 attempts for me to finally get to a show that actually allowed me to do that thing. And then I was like, oh, good. Okay, good. So I can do that. Now I'm going to move on to the next thing and find out whatever interests me there. But you would never, if you'd seen those 3 shows, you would never probably figure that out. But I think that that's okay. And I think it also talks about the tension between being an artist and being a collaborator, because each one of you is a particular artist, but you're also there as a designer to solve the problems for the director and for the play and tell the story. And those two things can sometimes pull on each other, and there's a continuum, I think.
I sort of feel more and more like we're animators, because we are, all of us, regardless of what part of the process you are involved in, we're trying to bring something to life. And, when you think of starting with words, it's pretty extraordinary to look at that entire process of taking words on a page and then making something, however it gets put together, that is an animation that could be hours long and that has all kinds of moving parts. And, it sort of made me start to look at everything in terms of what is the potential for bringing this to life. And how you do that, there's a million and a half different ways to do it on every project and with every group of people you're working with. But it's, I look at the idea of animation now totally differently, I think, because I think, oh, well, we think of animation as cartoons, but we are all animators.
We just got an excellent question in from the chat from Echo, which is, for young designers, what do you do to practice the skills and artistic thinking when you don't have shows going on?
Just live your life. Well, just live your life. I like, you can practice drawing. It's always a great skill, but actually the more you can actually draw from life, or the more experiences you have from real life, I think bringing that into your design, I think, is the best way. For me, I don't do pretend set designs when I'm not working, because that's not how the process works anyways. And I don't, I because of the self-isolation, I've been trying to draw every day, or just try to do something with my hands. But I think having interests outside of theater also makes you just more well-rounded as a human being, and you bring that to your work. I find that's just from my experience, but
I agree.
Yeah. And you have to be curious.
Yes, reading or being curious about other things. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that idea of a kind of a Renaissance like existence in some way that isn't just focused on the thing that we spend most of our time in. In fact, probably there are some of us who struggle with the answer to that question, only because like we just go from show to show. Like there isn't really that downtime between things that allows us to practice. I mean, in this moment, there is maybe an exception. Maybe we all have a lot of time right now to look at other things and think about other things. But in a regular schedule, there isn't a lot of that time. So bringing the other parts of your life to bear on the work that you do, I think, is important.
Read plays.
Yeah.
Don't try to design them, but read plays. If you've done tons of dramatic literature at university, try to get the taste of that out of your mouth so that you're just reading things for yourself. Go and see something, and then if you liked it, get the script and read it. I mean, just find out, and not to design at all, but know how you feel about a script. Know how you yourself feel about a script, so that if you had a conversation then with a friend or somebody, you'd be able to talk from your heart about the play. So that just you can not read it all and go and see things. You can find out that you work best from, not from that place, not from a community base, but from pursuit of other things. That's fine. But to be able to relate to a script, the designing is just follows that. It's not, it in some ways it's not as important. The execution is the second half.
Go
So
to art
take it-
galleries.
Art
Yeah.
galleries, yeah. Reading, looking at other painters, looking at the world out there, the visual world. There's so much going on right now. It's really exciting, and there's time to do that and to listen to music. A lot of different music now I've been listening to as well.
I follow a huge amount of different, not designers so much, but artists on Instagram. And I find when you find one artist, there's this guy named John Wentz. I think it's Wentz. He's from Paris. He posts one picture a day, and I'm so in love with his drawings. They're digital, and like I wish that I had drawn them. Every time I go, fuck, I wish I had drawn that. It's so good. And then you see that who he follows, and then John Wentz, Wentz. He's just great. And then I sort of saw it, and I follow a lot because I draw on the iPad. I follow a lot of iPad Procreate artists. Procreate is the program I draw on. And just to watch, I mean, I love watching other people draw. And I know when I post on Facebook and stuff, little animated drawings, people go, oh, I just love watching the process of how it goes. I saw a film, maybe 20 years ago called Picasso Paints, I think. And he was painting on a piece of glass. And you watched, he did this incredible painting. And then he scrubbed it all out except for the bottom. And it was beautiful. Scrubbed it all out except for the bottom, and then worked up again. You thought, that's so fascinating. And when you see on iPad that people draw and what you've erased and what you can change, I think it's fascinating to watch. I mean, I'm even fascinated when I'm standing in like Piccadilly Square or something to watch caricature artists. I could watch somebody draw all day. So I'm kind of absorbed right now in watching a lot of people on Instagram, watch them draw, and just seeing how I draw and learning to redraw.
Not now, but one quietish winter, I was walking past a little wee animation school called Max the Mutt that's really close to where I live. And I thought, I wonder if they have pick-up life drawing classes, that I could pay as you go or whatever. And they didn't, but they were curious enough about me that they let me audit the drawing classes. So I rejoined they said, what are you? I'm not a beginner. I'm not advanced. I'm intermediate. Okay. But it was fascinating because it was all young people, and man, they could just draw like crazy. And they had some technical skills that I didn't have. They do, the skeletons, whole courses drawing bones and all of that sort of stuff, because the animators are the ones who still really have to learn to draw. But there were things that I could do. My drawings, my figure studies and everything were all individual people, and they were better with the muscles and the anatomy. And I could not, even in 30 seconds, not have it be somebody. And so again, I've never had a better time, and it had nothing to do with theater, and it was terrific. Yeah.
We have another good question that came in from the chat from Amy, which is again focused on young designers. How do or did you balance designing to gain shows under your belt for experience while still needing to make some kind of money?
I was really poor for a long time and didn't have a car until I was in my 40s, and didn't own property until I was in my late 40s.
I think we were luckier when we were younger, though, because we could live really cheaply in Toronto. I remember, it didn't cost a lot. And because I was able to live on the money I made. It wasn't much. I remember Paul Thompson gave me, I think it was $70 for a show. And he said, what you don't spend on the show, you can keep for yourself. It was okay. That's very cool.
Had one of those.
Yeah. But
I think he still does that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I kept $35 and I paid my rent, but not nowadays. And so it's probably a good question, because I know my students.
I worked backstage at things like, bigger theaters are easier to pick up jobs, but be the scenic artist helper and clean the brushes, be the, all of those skills backstage. You get to watch other people working who've been at it longer than you to do in those shops, and it will make you a better, anything you learn about how things are built and made and thought through and executed. You know, be somebody's assistant in any craft at all, and there's satisfaction in that, and a small paycheck.
And I think that there's, like, when you're just starting out, and maybe in the first, I don't know, it's different for everybody, but let's just say the first few years, first 5 years, that there's different forms of payment, I would say. I think that there's getting paid, of course, is great to be able to pay your rent with the thing you do. But also there's what I always kind of described as, like, there's paying your dues, but there's different degrees or different ways of paying your dues, that some are smarter than others, I think. And I would say that, for example, I remember receiving a call from a young director my age and saying, you know, he was 24 and saying, want to work for free? And I said, what's the gig? What are we doing? And I knew that he had assembled a group of young up and coming artists, actors in Toronto, and it was a great show to be a part of. And the thing you have to remember, the people you're working with for free with now, so this director became an artistic director 20 years later. So in that journey, you develop a relationship, and of course, loyalty and a desire to build a relationship, an artistic relationship. And so my feeling is if everybody's ideally paying their dues together equally and struggling together, that's worth it. I think if you're the only one on the show not making any money, then I think that's another factor to be discussed. But I do think that is something I've noticed in the younger generation coming out. That is brought up a lot, which is a desire to leap into a career, and I get it. I recall not making much money for some time, but being fueled by trying to dive into building friendships and relationships, and not forcing it in a kind of businessy way, but literally just making work with friends that you're excited to put a show up with. And that evolves into something authentic. And I think authenticity is a kind of important part of that recipe.
I agree with everything you said, and I think that it's really important. Those relationships will carry you through your life, because one of the things that's the challenge is, what do you do when you're starting out and how do you get established? But one of the other ones, as you get to be older, is how do you keep doing it in the long haul, and how do you not get bored doing it? How do you keep challenging yourself? And I think one of the things that I've realized is that at the end of the day, I don't care if it's a big project or a small project. I just want to be working with people I find interesting, because that's what's going to carry you forward. And that part of getting to establish that group of people that you can be sympathetic towards in terms of how you work and what you care about and what gets you excited and what stimulates you. I mean, you know, you will go through your life and some of them will die and you'll lose them, and some of them will have to be replaced with new people. But if you don't have that group of people you care about working with, then the work is too hard.
Community.
I agree with everything that's been said. I think it's important also to mention or to acknowledge that the economics of living in Toronto has completely changed. Even when I first came to Ryerson in the early 90s, and I could easily get a room with friends for $400 a month. I don't think that you can't do that these days. And I think a one bedroom in Toronto, the average one bedroom is $1,800 for a one bedroom. And fees, I mean, I don't want to get into a giant fee discussion because we've had that discussion on the show and it's ongoing, but like the fees aren't going up. So we're getting behind. Like every year, young designers are getting more behind and more behind and more behind, because back in the 80s and the 70s, there was more shows and it was cheaper to live. Even in the 90s, there was more theater, there was just more work around. And now there's always this balance of like, I can't do another free show because I got $1,000 in rent that I have to pay as with my roommate or my two other roommates. So I get $800 to two other roommates to actually just live in the city. And I think we should lament that because you can't just explore, I think, as a young artist as much as even I could. And I'm a generation behind a lot of people in this conversation. So yeah, it's maddening. And I think we need to pressure government to shore up that end.
Yeah, I know I've had students who really, really talented students who just gave up and went to do something else because they just couldn't make it. They got lots of work, but they didn't get paid for it.
And I think there's lots of people who have quit sort of mid-career as well, that it's not easy. But I think also that I have seen that in smaller communities, because Toronto has been becoming so difficult, that there has been kind of a lot of gurgling growth in other communities, in Peterborough, in Hamilton, in Kitchener, and they may have the same resources or facilities, but there's an energy there of things being started, which is, I think, kind of potentially exciting. Because when I started out, it was all England, it was all London and New York. Like there was not much in Toronto, and things filled that vacuum. And I see that happening in different ways now in smaller communities because Toronto is becoming so difficult. I live in hope anyway.
The one thing I would like to say that is there is no one right way. Like, don't be worried about being off the path. If there's something you're curious about, but you don't think it relates directly to theater design, so be it. We've come from all over the place, and some of the most interesting contributors to theater are people with really oddball backgrounds. There is no wrong way to grow as a person. If you're curious about something, go and do it. And we all need to learn to be to do multiple things. We have to learn that over time, if not at the same time. And you don't just step off some kind of singular path to a goal is not to go direct. It's to make yourself a fuller, more interesting person. So don't be too afraid. Just do what you want to do if you can.
It's worth mentioning too, this doesn't exactly solve the problem of the economics of some of the big cities in Canada and how difficult it is for a young person to start out and get into this career. But I do think this is one of the careers where assisting is still a really relevant way to get into the business, right? And I know that we've talked about the idea of assisting backstage and getting your hands on in the painter shop, and if you can get some carp work, that's great. But I also think that connecting with other designers, with senior designers, I owe such a debt of gratitude to Ken MacDonald here, who, when I came back to Toronto, I'm known as Ken #2 at ADC and at Shaw, and I developed that relationship because I worked through Ken MacDonald, and they know me there because of that, and that's valuable. I mean, there's a great deal of value in that kind of relationship. And I think that even though it's still harder to pay rent with those with an assistance fee, it still is a really important way to learn in this profession.
Oh yeah.
Well, I think it's true. I mean, Ken, I was going to say the same thing, that both you, Lorenzo, and you assisted me lots of times. And I think that a young designer who's a really good draftsperson or a good model maker, like Chung Hae, who is just so wonderful, I know works for a lot of us. I mean, I just wrote her and said, hey, we're all going to be on this thing if you want to watch us. Someone like that is just absolutely invaluable. And so then once you guys, when you first started out, you weren't doing that much stuff, but now you guys are so busy. I hardly ever, I never use Canada Lorenzo. I'd love to, but I think what's so fantastic is people will say to me, well, do you know any designers who can do this? And I go, yes, I do actually, because I got to know you guys and because you got to know me. And I think that that's something really that young designers who have the skills that some of us don't have. I mean, I know the Sue people, everybody except me can draft really well, but it's just, I think, a really good way to come in to get to know other people, because through that, I think Mackenzie got sort of involved in Soul Pepper and stuff like that. He just sort of got to know me and to Soul Pepper, and then he just took off. And I think it's so fantastic. So I do think for a young designer, if they can, Ken literally wrote me out of the blue and I didn't even know who he was. But I had lost it. I think Robin Fisher was designing for me, and she had moved to Ottawa. And I said, well, sure, I'd love to meet you. I actually just lost my assistant. And that was just a great relationship for such a long time, and still is. That I think maybe in answer to that question, that if you are a young designer and could hook up with a more senior designer, even just as a bit of a mentor, no designer minds talking to a younger designer about ideas. In fact, it's a privilege, and you feel quite honored that somebody actually cares about what you've done. So yes, I think that would be a good thing to do.
We have another interesting question in from chat from Rachel, which is, do you also design another discipline, costume, lighting, or projection or sound? Does that affect your set design process in any way?
I love to do both whenever I can. Some projects it's just too much, but costumes and sets, you tend to be in a slightly different rhythm so that it's possible in a lot of circumstances to do both. And having that chance to make your world, but I'm also happy to go just to set or go just to costumes and have the collaboration with another designer. That's also makes it fresh and interesting too. So I don't know if it affects things overall, but I would hate to ever be asked to really make the choice, like to define yourself as one thing or another.
I'm with Sue. I feel like I sat with a Directors Guild of Canada application on my desk for over a year and never filled it out because I was thinking, I've got to find a way to, be economically more solvent. I'm going to go into film, but I couldn't decide whether I wanted to do costume or production design. And I think to me, like Sue says, I would do one or the other, but I love doing both together because to me it's about humans in space, and that's really all I care about. Like, what's that combined relationship, and how does that work? So,
for me, I whether I do set in costumes or set in lights, it does affect the set design process, only because I think, and I feel very blessed to have worked with so many amazing lighting designers. But when oftentimes my impetus to want to jump in and say, well, I'll do the set and lights on that one, is because I'm seeing the story through, the language of the design, wanting to manipulate the lighting to shape how I'm going to do the set. And so I'm engaged with both right away, right from the beginning. And and vice versa. So, and I would not consider myself a projection designer, but I would consider myself a set designer that does projection. And that is because literally I wanted to explore it, but I didn't want to have to commit to it. So if we wanted to cut it, I could. And eventually feeling that at some level, and sometimes the distinction needs to be made, but just being curious about the medium as an extension of set design. And then on my own time with YouTube and meeting people, exploring the discipline, but to do the kind of deep dive that I know single discipline projection designers, like what they have in terms of even software and hardware knowledge is way beyond my knowing or even interest. So but it does, for me, it does affect how I work.
Don't you find, I find it's really hard not to think of everything when you're designing the show, even if you're just the set designer. It's all there. It's all part of how you see it. I can't not design the lighting in my head. I'm not the lighting designer, but I've certainly thought it through. Because
lighting designers love that. No, I'm just.
Well, well, I see Kimberly Patel's question here coming up.
Oh. Especially when in the middle of levels, the set designer is sitting behind
you. Just so
going,
you know, this question that she's posting, this is a very passive aggressive question from Kim. I want you to all know.
So, I mean, you can decide whether you put a window somewhere, like whether you put a door somewhere, whether you put something that light will engage with in a particular way because of what it is. And you're so in that way, I'm sort of like Pat. I know I'm not a lighting designer, but I sure think about the potential of what can be lit in terms of figuring out that composition of stuff in space. So over to Kim's question.
Well, and also just to add, like, if nothing else, like set electrics are so useful, right? Just in creating the picture. Whether it's the practical instruments or like the theatrical instruments, like light on stage, actual light sources on stage are a beautiful thing to add to a set, right? And so you have to kind of think at least a little bit in dynamically about light, even if you're just a set designer.
The combination of set designer and projection designer, you gotta get your projection designer on site at the preliminary stage. You really need somebody with the knowledge of equipment and positions in the theater and everything to troubleshoot with you, as well as to talk ideas and everything else. I had an experience recently that was so tough because my deadlines were all coming due and I was meant to be executing the set design, and they were not engaging the projection designer. They were keeping that on a much later timeline, like lighting came in before projection. Well, that was just awful. I mean, it was asking for trouble. I told them, you know, I need to get there's flexibility here in this whole hang. Now let's get a group together so that it all can make sense. So some things are just absolutely collaborative. They should be. It's you're putting yourself at a terrible disadvantage not to.
Whenever I'm designing a show, I always call the lighting designer, whoever it is, and say, can you come over? Can we talk? Or like at the very beginning of the process, because I don't see how you do it without that. If I know that if they've been hired.
I think it depends too on what the material is that you're doing. Sometimes I find that I don't even know anything about what the world might be until I've had a chance to work with the director enough to figure out some of the basic language of that world. And so in a sense, in that kind of situation, I sometimes think I don't even know, like there's nothing there yet. And once there starts to be something there, then I feel like it's great to start having conversations with what lighting designers can bring.
Yeah, I think that's what
and projection designers. But you know, there's lots of times when I feel like you're wandering around in circles in the dark going, is it a bread box or is it an elephant? And you know, you're not much good to anybody until you figure that out.
I like inviting everybody into the process as early as they want to be. I'm not precious about any part of my process. With a couple of directors, mostly with me and Leah Kino and some other directors, I've brought this sort of way of working to other directors as well, is actually bring the entire creative team together. The set and costume designer, projection designer, if there's one, lighting designer, sound designer even. It may be incredibly boring. It may be that first date awkwardness where we're like, what do we do? But it's everybody jamming together. So we call them designer jams. There's always good food, usually, and they can choose not to come. any of the collaborators, but I personally like having the lighting designer in on the process very, very early if they want to, if they're interested. So I try to share as much as possible because I want to give them opportunities as well. I mean, there's some times where I completely block off all the rooms and they can't do anything, but I try to, as much as possible, leave them opportunities. And if I'm not doing the costumes, also being aware of if they have a strong feeling of color, then I will hold back the color on the set because I don't want them to fight each other.
Absolutely.
So it's just being open to all the collaborators that I'm going to be working with because it has to look like it's cohesive. So that's just my personal preference. But
We should say that Kim Purtell's question was, when do you like to involve other collaborators in the design process? For those who hadn't guessed already.
Yeah.
We didn't actually mention the question. And she did reiterate that she loves you all.
Even though she doesn't know.
I do find that it is a director, or the question of when everybody comes together. Sometimes if it's left up to the director, it may, actually I know some that just can only deal one-on-one at the start, and need that intimacy before they branch it out. But I agree with Cami that it can be an exciting process to kind of just open it up. And I think if everybody feels like everything that's being said right now in the early exploration, that it's not about pinning down anything, and no one has to worry about nurturing ideas that we're not excited about for too long. That and ultimately, I think everyone respects each other's discipline enough to understand that I'm not trying to design lights, or they're not trying to design set. It's more of just about getting to the idea that that's going to be the diving board for all of us. And you can either do it now or later. To Kim's point, I think she was saying she likes to be part of it earlier. It just enriches the process and the knowledge base.
I just coming from just trying to be empathic or empathetic towards especially new directors. Do you think it's overwhelming? Like if you have an idea in your head of what the show should be, and you've got a set designer, a lighting designer, a costume designer. Sometimes those places are combined, but let's say it's a larger show plus a sound designer plus a projection designer. If I had 6 designers in the room with me or 5 designers in the room with me, I'd be a bit overwhelmed to try to get my ideas in, especially if I was a younger designer. So maybe they may pick the set designer or the production designer, come in and just have a one-on-one conversation to sort of feel safe and figure those ideas out first. So I guess it depends on the director.
yeah, it totally does. I think it's their comfort level, or if they want to have that same conversation 5 times, individual conversations or all together. It depends on how I would imagine how comfortable they are. But yeah, because for me, I can't get every director to do that jam process. So
Go ahead, Lorenzo.
No, just to Sue's point, to nerd out for 1 second process wise, but that there is something, because we're moving into a world of projection design is a really significant contributor to theater design. I am aware that contractually they're required to come a little later in the process, that they start a little later, and it's challenging to engage in a process where you don't want to feel like you're driving it too much too soon for them. And in the end, once they really can turn their attention towards it, it's going to become something else later. And so I think theater companies now need to start thinking about projection really as if they're going to collaborate meaningfully with set design, that it's got to be right at the beginning. They're both setting off together. I mean, all should be, but I understand. I mean, if we're also honest, it's really hard to get 6 designers in a room at the same time. I mean, now with technology, we can all be together, but it is difficult scheduling wise. I've found in the past, we'd love to, but we can't. But
Yeah, I was going to say that like when working with a younger director, which in part involves acknowledging that I am no longer really a young designer, which is tough, but I've come to grips with that a little bit. There's a special kind of care. Yeah. Well, there is a special kind of care that like I really, and I think a lot of people do this, they try and make sure that those ideas that they're trying to articulate, that you're really working carefully with them to make sure that you're not going to run over them. You're going to be like, you're going to really try and help them realize whatever that young vision is. That's certainly a feeling that I get when I feel like I'm working with somebody who's less experienced. Is like, okay, well, this is somebody who needs maybe a little bit more attention to really help them realize whatever idea they're trying to get across.
I think some of that is self-interest too, Ken, and that you need to go slowly so that they feel like they own it. Because if they don't have that thing coming from there, you could end up in a place where you don't want to be, and that's not. It can be self-protective, you know, in terms of the meeting to meeting, but the overall goal is still to create a kind of unity, and that really can only happen through the director's commitment to it all. So I think that kind of go slow, light touch, all of that sort of thing. I think that serves everybody. I thought on that panel of lighting designers a week ago or two, whenever it was, I thought that was something that really stood out, was that those lighting designers know how to deal with those early conceptual stages. There was not a lot of nerding out from those folks going to go on about, you know, they weren't making decisions about the rig or writing their cues out and then developing those relationships with designers. So that's not something for us to really talk about today, but it is that job of projection design and lighting design. If you want that earlier collaboration, the job itself has to have that lighter touch than it did traditionally.
We have another question from the chat from Jonathan, which is, have you ever started using other disciplines to make your designs? For example, drawing a costume and then using that experiment to create the set?
No, not. I think of things that changed, like when I was doing a set for Design for Living at Shaw Festival. It's a Noel Coward play, and I had made this model out of all these windows, and I thought, oh, it looks like a million shows that I've done. And Morris came home and said, oh, I like that. And I went, I don't like it. And I crumpled it up and I threw it on the floor, not in anger, just like, oh, I don't like it. And I put it back in the box and we went, oh, I really like that. And so that in the set became that crumpled piece of torn thing. And then that determined everything else that it takes place in Paris and London and New York at the same time. So everything became twisted. And I think that, you know, it didn't start off with a costume designer thing, but it started off with a mistake. And I think often you find that a mistake, or you tore something, you put it back on the page again and went, oh, that's kind of interesting. That, you know, I get frustrated with my own drawings and I'll tear them and I go, oh, it could become a collage. I think that it can be determined by different things that you do. Yeah. That's a weird answer.
I mean, I'd say from a video, you know, projection design point of view, that I have worked on shows where I've known what I want to do projection design wise, but no idea what the set should be. And then you're kind of trying to figure out what's going to receive the projection and how is that going to, so you're working outward from the video, from the projection design to figure out what the set should be. But still eventually you then tip over into being a set designer and start thinking in that discipline more literally. So, but but I've never thought abstractly as you're describing.
You can certainly go to do your research with one thing in mind and use it for something, again, completely different. You can go to a painter thinking it's your, it's your palette, and it turns out to be all about shapes. I mean, I think early on, really early, that not to say I'm searching for this, but just to be out there roaming, that the disciplines really can cross over a lot at that stage and be quite abstract. And fabrics, I mean, I think a lot of us just love texture and fabrics. So we've all had that experience of putting something completely out of scale in a model, your little piece of lace or your mesh, and that you would think of as costume material, and you go, okay, yeah, in an entirely different scale, I now have my backdrop or whatever, or I now have my floor texture, or this now that I've got this piece of linen in my hand, I know what everything is. So that early on, I think there's no division between the disciplines sometimes.
And I think the important word in that question is experiment. And at the end of the day, what is an experiment? I mean, I've taken laundry dryer fluff and used it. And I've taken curry powder out of the kitchen and used it. So like the fun part is when you can genuinely experiment. And when you do that, honestly, I think you don't know what's going to come out of it, and you don't know where it's going to go, and you don't know what applications it may have. But man, oh man, curry powder is actually a really interesting material. I'm here to tell you.
But Shawn, I want to see the set you made out of laundry lint.
Yeah, me too.
Was it Private Lives or?
No.
I should mention, just apropos of nothing, that I remember listening about. I'm a big fan of The West Wing, and I found out that Snuffy Walden, who's the composer for The West Wing, is a guitarist, and he wrote all the music. He writes everything that he does on the guitar, but there's no guitars in the entire West Wing, and I could not get that. I couldn't get around. I mean, he's just putting notes in his guitar, and they get translated, through software on the computer. But I couldn't. There was the fact that he was using an instrument that didn't sound like anything he was actually composing on, but he would use that to actually compose the music, and then out came this violin timp small orchestral piece of music that blew me away. And I'm sure that happens. Everyone uses a different process to find their ways through their ideas. And ways that I would never think of actually exploring happens all the time. We're at 9:27. We have, there was a question about, I want to acknowledge it only because I'm not going to ask it, about the future of design. I think that we can save that for next time. I always want to leave something on the table before we leave, because I think we can have a big discussion about where theater's going with this panel and, maybe a couple additions for the next time. So I want to thank you all for being here tonight. It's another really interesting discussion, and I was captivated by all of you. And those Cami and Ken, I want to have you on the show. I want to interview you guys hopefully in the next couple months to get that done before I go off on my other adventure in Kingston. So keep that in mind. I will remind everybody that Lorenzo, Shawn, Sue, Ken, and Pat have all been interviewed on the Title Block, and their episodes can be found at thetitleBlock.com. And this show will be released in a rather unedited form. I'll cut off the embarrassing bits at the beginning when I was still fumbling around and release that on the podcast feed. And then we'll see you next week with I think projection design will end up being next week, but we'll let you know after this weekend when we get the design panel together. So thank you all for being on the Title Block Live, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Very much.
Oh, great to see everybody. Oh my
Yeah.
God.
Guys, it's great to see you.
Oh.
And we'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.